What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 139. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, I'm breaking down a new bill introduced by Senators Sanders, Lee, and Murphy that will replace the War Powers Act. Some good parts of this bill, some bad parts and shortcomings, so I'll get into all of that. Right now, people are demanding to cancel Ben & Jerry's and calling the company anti-Semitic. So I'll get into what provoked those claims. And then I'm going to look at a new lawsuit brought against the NYPD alleging they're training officers how to get into people's sealed arrest records. So all that and more on today's show. Be sure you share the show. It's the easiest thing you could do to support the show. Get it out there to new listeners, help us grow the base. And we're trying to put the show out there on more platforms to do that as well. So recently we got the show on Rumble. We're waiting to hear back from iHeartRadio on getting the show up there, but we're looking to expand the show. So if you got somewhere that you think this show should be, send me an email, a message on Twitter or something like that, and we'll try to set that up. So again, the show is now up on Rumble, and the link to that will be in the show notes page. The show is always at the Libertarian Institute. That's where it's hosted. That's where I am the news editor and write the daily news roundup. And if you go to libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle, you'll find a full archive of my show and the daily news roundup. You can find the video version of the show on Odyssey and YouTube, as well as Rumble. You can support the show on Patreon or Subscribestar by setting up recurring donations. If you do want to do something with crypto, there are addresses for Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash in the show notes page. You can support the show and get yourself some great high-quality CBD products by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Again, that's PalomaVerdeCBD.com. When you check out, you use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, and you get 25% off when you spend $75 or more. And the show gets a kickback when you do that. Now, the reason you should get your CBD products from Paloma Verde is because they're the highest quality CBD I've ever used. Their products actually work and work consistently because they are what they say they are. Unlike some of my past experiences where I would buy CBD and sometimes I would feel, oh yeah, I get some pain relief, and other times you don't really feel anything. So high quality products with lab tested results. You can see those results at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. I really like their topical products. I have been using their sports cream pretty much every day. So PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE, and check out their great selection of high quality CBD products. Now let's get into the show. First story I have to talk about is the NYPD searching people's private records. This was published at The Intercept, and it's allegations from a new lawsuit. It's going to be a class action suit brought against the NYPD. Now, one of the things that they're looking for in this lawsuit are the actual training documents, which the NYPD is alleging are private documents and not for public consumption. I would really disagree on that. I think the public, when it comes to the case of any kind of public servants, we should have a right to those training documents to see what our people who are paid by the public are out there doing and what they're being trained to do. Now, the evidence for this is, I think, pretty striking. There is good evidence, and I guess the NYPD has admitted that police officers did have access to 14 databases that had sealed arrest records of, I believe, 3.5 million people, but there were 6 million arrest records. So some people 2, 3, 4, probably 10 times for a couple or something like that. So all these arrest records are supposed to be sealed in private, which means, the cops shouldn't get them, but certainly the public shouldn't get them. But in the past, they actually have ended up in the hands of the media. And New York City defense lawyers say they regularly find NYPD printouts of their clients' old sealed arrest records and prosecutors' paperwork. And again, then they end up getting into the hands of the media. So that's probably the real problem with it, right? You can make somebody's rap sheet look longer. You can make them look more like a career criminal if you can include more arrest records whenever you tell the media. So in the case of somebody like Eric Gardner, or even, not that this necessarily happened with George Floyd, but people who are victims of police violence but have their own violent or run-ins with the law in their history, and I think both of those men did have violent things. People become less and less sympathetic the more and more prevalent the violence in their past has been, the more and more serious it's been. And so the more times you could show somebody's been arrested, then the less people are going to be sympathetic that if they die in the hands of police custody. So I think that's one of the problematic things here. Also, for police officers, when they make a traffic stop or something like that, if they're looking up these records, then they're going to have more of a reason to be suspicious, more confrontational, more alert when they're dealing with people. And again, these are records that should not be in anyone's hands, including the NYPD, I believe. So this seems like if the lawsuit is allowed to move forward, we could get some very interesting documents become public on how the NYPD is training its officers. But I do think this should be a movement nationwide to get these training documents and make sure that the people who are enforcing the laws in our community are actually being trained to do that and not trained to do other things like violate the law, which it seems like these officers would be doing here. All right, now moving on to some disturbing news that people are taking any vacations at national parks this summer. This from the 10th Amendment Center. National Park Service joining the National Surveillance State. And the U.S. Park Service, I guess, is under the purview of the Department of the Interior, and the Department of the Interior released a memo saying that the National Park Service is going to start collecting data, and then that data would be made available to federal law enforcement databases. So some things they might collect from people who are staying at a national park would be the name, organization, social security number, tax ID number, date of birth, address, phone number, fax number, email, job description, job title, car information like license plate number, VIN number, car color, car make, car model, and then info about what park you're staying at, so your general location for a certain amount of time. And again, all this information is going to be made available to public databases, and so it's just more and more data that the national security state is going to sweep up on more and more of us. This seems particularly nefarious for the current times, as I'm sure there's less people that are traveling through like TSA and airports right now, and so there's probably less information being collected on people at those places and where they're traveling. However, there's more people going to national parks, with COVID and lockdowns. Tons of people bought RVs, more camping and stuff like that, and so this is maybe a way the government is offsetting that loss of data they were collecting on us before to get access to it in this way. All right. That's what I had on that story. The next is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Senate Republicans want to increase Biden's 2020 military budget by $25 billion. That's right. When Republicans found out that Biden was only increasing his military budget by I think like 1.5% or something like that over Trump's last budget, they threw a fit. How could the Pentagon not get at least a 5% bump in spending? I think this will actually get them to that 5%, 3 to 5% that they were looking for in an increase in Pentagon spending. Senator Jim Inhofe, he's from Oklahoma, said that he believes the $25 billion increase will have bipartisan support. It includes $1.1 billion for the Army and training exercises and another $1.9 billion. I assume this is for the Army as well, for aviation platforms and combat vehicles. It's interesting that the Army is receiving at least $3 billion of this $25 billion, because in Biden's budget, one of the things he did is cut back the Army budget a little bit to give more money to research and development. This is something that I thought might happen with Biden's budget proposal, is that it would actually be a lot higher, because Biden was cutting out things from the budget that he's going to be a-okay with actually approving and spending money on. He's just counting on the Republicans to come in and inflate the budget even higher, and that seems to be what's happening here. Let's move on and discuss this one detainee who got transferred out of Gitmo. Abdul Latif Nassar has been in Guantanamo Bay for well over a decade, and he was just released. He was cleared for a review, so that they say this guy is in no way a threat to the U.S. We don't have a case against him we could put together. Probably anything that any kind of case they bring against him, the guy was tortured, so that's a big hole in their plan. And he gets released from Guantanamo Bay and gets to travel to Morocco. And so this is a little bit of good news that we've transferred one more person out of Guantanamo Bay, this terrible torture prison that we run in Cuba. Now, there are still 39 people detained at Guantanamo Bay. 10 are, like Mr. Nasser, able to be released. I believe, cleared for release, not going to do anything to the U.S. at any time. And then there's 17 people that come up for periodic evaluation as to whether they could be transferred. So I guess the Guantanamo Bay version of a parole board would sit down and decide if, this person is potentially a threat to the United States. It's very interesting that in a lot of cases it's the right wingers saying that we have to throw away our Constitution and our judicial rules when it comes to Guantanamo Bay, and we have to take all these people and hold them either forever, take them out back and shoot them, or figure out some way to prosecute them in our justice system where we allow evidence that was obtained through torture to come into the record. So, there's a huge problem with prosecuting these Guantanamo Bay cases because the Bush administration tortured these guys rather than, treating them like prisoners of war or something like that, or, looking at other methods, to extract information that are not inhumane, like torture, especially, some of the torture methods that were used in Guantanamo Bay. So let's see, then there are a bunch of remaining people, so that gets us down to, I guess, 12 or so remaining that aren't either in the 10 or the 17 that might be cleared. Some of these people are like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was the guy who planned 9/11, somebody who we went in prison forever, and of all the people who got tortured in Guantanamo Bay, really not that sympathetic for this guy. It's just the precedent that it sets to torture somebody, thinking that that's the right thing to do, as the Bush administration did. And so one of the things in this article that I have up from Defense One, they're pointing out that just transferring the people that the Biden administration is going to be able to transfer out of Guantanamo Bay really isn't going to be a resolution to that prison, because we have all these people here and no path forward in our justice system to release them. And so, as much as I hate to say this, I think one of the solutions has to be that you prosecute somebody like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, you move him to the United States, you prosecute him here, and anybody you can build a case against, you gotta let him go to a third country and end this calamity and this human rights embarrassment that we have on the Cuban island. It's very interesting in the past weeks how much people are screaming for the liberation of Cuba, and how many right wingers are in the U.S. are appalled by the Cuban government's human rights abuses, and even libertarians are jumping on the idea that we somehow need to be involved in the liberation of the Cuban people, when the U.S. runs a torture prison on the Cuban island. Not that Castro probably hasn't done, or the Castro regime now I guess it's Miguel Diaz that's the president of Cuba. I'm sure they do terrible things in their prisons. Terrible things happen in the regular U.S. prisons all the time. But, we pit people up, random people from across the Muslim world, ship them off to a place that they had no idea even existed, and torture them for years and years. And even when they're found to be, like, innocent, like, vague ties to the Taliban. They were kind of involved in the Taliban, but these people weren't international terrorists, and we still hold them for years and years, and just continue to force them to live in these atrocious conditions in Guantanamo Bay, and at the cost of millions of dollars every year to the American taxpayer. Not to mention again what it does to our Constitution and eroding what the American promise is meant to be. Now let's get into this new bill from Senators Bernie Sanders, Mike Lee, and Chris Murphy. Of course, people probably recognize all three of those names as have been leading the charge to try to end the U.S. intervention in Yemen. But here they have a little bit of a different idea rather than just trying to end the war in Yemen with another War Powers resolution. They're looking at overhauling the War Powers Act, which was passed during the Nixon administration over Nixon's veto. It was passed as a way to constrain presidential war powers. However, that's not really ends up being what's happened from the War Powers Act. And so there's a couple articles I have here, one by Daniel Larison at Responsible Statecraft, the other one by David Swanson, I think he's World Beyond War, and they both do a pretty good job of getting into this bill and breaking down where it's a positive and where it's a negative. So Swanson says, to be clear, this bill is not, peace, stability, and disarmament, and it doesn't deal with the, congressional inaction problem, which is that if the president's waging these unconstitutional wars and Congress isn't going to do anything about it, or they're going to pass resolutions that don't have any teeth, or allow the president to just veto any of these resolutions and continue to wage the war, then it really doesn't matter what's in any bill. The president is just the dictator, and the Congress doesn't have war powers at all. And so the Congress actually needs to rein in its war powers, and it needs to have consequences for presidents who violate the rules of the Constitution that say Congress declares war and the president just can't unilaterally go to war. And so if the Congress has to look at impeachment as a result, that's what it has to do. And unless they're trying to reach out and do that, it doesn't matter what they replace the War Powers Act with. But this particular bill is called the National Security Powers Act, NSPA. And it has a few, very interesting and good mechanisms in it that I think would actually force Congress to act in different ways and, give more consent to the empire, if not, rein in the empire a little bit. So, it repeals all the current authorizations for use of military force. So this would include the 1991, I think it's the 1953, the 2002, and most importantly, the 2001. And so that in itself is really significant that it is repealing the 2001 AUMF, and it does not replace it. And it would call for, I guess, an end to all the 2001 AUMF operations, things going on around the world under that authorization. It would call for that to end in 6 months. So that does seem to be something. Now, it would require a joint authorization of Congress to enact a War Powers Act to stop the war. But that's already the case. It isn't clear in the bill if it would be a privileged motion like it is now. So in the past, every session of Congress, somebody like Ron Paul or Barbara Lee could introduce a bill, calling for the end of the war in Afghanistan or something like that. I would hope that this new legislation would ensure it's worded the same way to include that kind of language to allow it to be a privileged motion that anybody could bring to the floor and get a vote on. It defines the definition of hostilities, which the previous War Powers Act didn't. This was abused by the Obama and the Trump administration by defining hostilities so loosely that they were able to wage the war in Libya and claim that it wasn't hostilities. Although I do think that the current definition in this law has a lot of problems, including saying it's defined as the use of lethal force are the potential to use lethal force, and that seems to allow something like what Obama did in Syria, where he was like, oh, we just have advisors, we don't have boots on the ground. I think it should just include a deployment of all troops to any country has to be approved by Congress. One thing in the War Powers Act is it basically allows the president to start a war and then has 60 days to get authorization from Congress, which if you let the president start a war and you give them any number of days before they had to get authorization for Congress, you just gave the president the ability to start the war. However, this does restrain it from 60 days to 20 days. And so, this may be a step in the right direction, as a war can be, far less entrenched in 3 weeks than in 2 months, and less in the minds of Americans that this is a war we're fighting. And so maybe this is a potential benefit to actually have this shortened to 20 days. It made some improvements on authorizations for use of military force, AUMFs. It says that the new AUMFs have to be only 2 years, and they have to have certain conditions like who the U.S. is fighting and why. Now, I think actually the 2001 AUMF is fairly limited to Afghanistan and fighting the Taliban and Al-Qaeda there. However, it's been stretched to fight wars in dozens of countries. And so again, once you pass one of these AUMFs, the government's going to run absolutely wild with it. But having the sunset clause, I think, is a good idea. It changes the way, I guess, funding for wars work, where if Congress doesn't explicitly fund a war through an authorization for use of military force, then that war won't have funding. I think that probably the 2 best things that this bill actually does, though, is it would change the way national emergencies and weapon sales are approved by the Congress. And so the president could declare a national emergency, but it's only limited to 30 days without congressional approval. It could be only approved for 1 year at a time and 5 years maximum. This seems to make sense. If you have a national emergency going on for 5 years, it's not an emergency anymore. It's a status quo. And so you can't really act on emergency powers at that point. That seems like a pretty reasonable and beneficial way to have things done. Now the president declares a national emergency, and in 30 days he renews it. Yeah, that's possible. And just like with the war powers issues, if Congress isn't willing to act against the president, take actions against the president, then it's all meaningless anyways. When it comes to the weapon sales, it says that it will require Congress to give explicit approval for weapon sales. And so in one sense, I think this may be a really, really good thing, that if Congress has to vote on these weapon sales, they're going to vote on less of them, especially when it right now happens like all the time. People don't even realize the State Department gives approval, the White House gives approval, it goes through, and unless Congress could put together a vote with a 2/3 majority in each house to override a presidential veto, they can't stop one of these weapon sales. And yet my fear is that what they're going to do is pass an annual arms sale package where they just give obscene amounts of leeway for the administration to negotiate arms sales. And so every single thing in this bill can be undermined, and it could end up not being any real step in the right direction. However, if some of these provisions play out like they should, this could rein in the U.S. empire a little bit. And so I don't think it's a complete waste to support or pass this bill. I don't think it, as David Swanson said, this isn't the end of empire or anything like that, but it is a step in the right direction. All right, let's look at this Ben & Jerry's situation. So on Ben & Jerry's website right here, July 19th, 2001, they say Ben & Jerry's will end sales of our ice cream in the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, I did look into and clarify because I was actually concerned by that. Because if you're going to end all sales in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which would be the occupied territories, then it seems that it's almost worse for the Palestinians because it's harder for them to get into Israeli proper than it is for the Israeli settlers. And so if you're depriving anybody of Ben & Jerry's, it seems like you would have been depriving the Palestinians of Ben & Jerry's then. However, that's not the case. They're just ending the sales within the settlements, and I guess it is just through their licensed partnerships. And so I'm not sure if... I've never been to the West Bank. If there's some equivalent to the local 7-Eleven gas station there where the dude goes to like Walmart or Sam's Club or whatever and buys like 50 of these Ben & Jerry's and then brings them to his gas station to sell, I'm pretty sure that'll still be happening, but they have any agreements to sell, from Ben & Jerry's to an individual store there. I guess they will be cutting that off. They are still going to sell Ben & Jerry's within Israel proper. All right, so that doesn't seem like it should be a big deal or really anything I want to talk about on the show. I thought that if Ben & Jerry's really want to make a statement, they probably shouldn't sell ice cream anywhere in Israel except for the I guess Palestinian areas, right? Like you would have a problem with the Israeli state, and that's not just limited to the settlers. It's not as if it's only the occupied territories, but the country that's doing the occupying you would also probably want to target with this too. But apparently because of the conflict with the parent company, this is all Ben & Jerry's could get them to okay with. Now the crazy thing isn't that Ben & Jerry's not selling ice cream in the West Bank when there's probably like 20 other options, and who knows how popular it is. And now I'm sure that in a West Bank settlement they're probably all boycotting their Ben & Jerry's, like throwing it in the street to melt and stuff like that. That they feel personally insulted by this. And so now, no matter if they decide to reverse this decision or not, I'm guessing there's not going to be very many Ben & Jerry's sales within the West Bank, and probably less in Israel proper. But the reaction has been absolutely crazy. The Israeli ambassador to the United States, Gilad Erdan, sent a letter to the governors of 35 states that have laws on the book against the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. This is something I've talked about a lot in the past on the show. There's, 35 U.S. states that have passed laws saying that if you support boycotting Israel, then you are anti-Semitic and you cannot work for the state. And these laws have various teeth and stuff like that. Some it's caused like a speech pathologist in Texas to have to quit her job. And Abby Martin had a lawsuit against the state of Georgia, which she won over this law because it stifled her freedom of speech. And so the country of Israel is trying to use this to target Ben & Jerry's, which I guess is still based in Burlington, Vermont, although they have a parent company. It seems like if this was a little bit more of a right-wing company like MyPillow, and the French were calling for the U.S. to boycott MyPillow and to pass laws to prevent sales of MyPillow, every Republican would have an entire closet full of MyPillow pillows, no matter how terrible those pillows are. And it's very interesting that in this case it seems to have a lot of right-wing support, including for a Oklahoma state senator, James Lankford, who called for the state of Oklahoma to outright ban Ben & Jerry's products. I guess any place that the government would have any contracts with Ben & Jerry's to, sell ice creams at their ballparks or stuff like that. He wants to cancel all of that. And maybe the most over the top reaction I've seen so far is the Israeli president. This is a new president, by the way, Isaac Herzog, called for boycotts against Israel Israel, a new kind of terrorism. So he's saying this boycott by Ben and Jerry's is a new kind of terrorism. Absolutely absurd and disgusting rhetoric, when of course it's the Palestinian people that are suffering, and why Ben and Jerry's made this decision. Now, I guess I should note here that since I do work for antiwar.com, and all of our articles this week from antiwar.com have had disclosure saying that antiwar.com has received donations in the past from Ben Cohen, the co-founder of Ben and Jerry's. And while I'm paid by antiwar.com, I never personally have had any money donated to me from Ben and Jerry's. I like their ice cream. It's okay. I don't agree with a ton of their politics, and on this one, I thought it was an okay move. I mean, it's good that it's happening. It's good that some companies are doing this. Apparently, it was the conflict with the parent company, but I think bigger moves could have been done, and it's really not that big of a deal. I guess maybe one of the things that this does, though, is all these overreactions, calling this terrorism, calling this anti-Semitic, helps to wear down the usefulness of those terms, and just brings the conversation more front and center. Even if don't necessarily think that the decision by Ben & Jerry's, especially since it doesn't even take place until I think after 2022 when the contract's up, right? So if anybody in the West Bank settler, get yourself you probably got a freezer, just fill it up with Ben & Jerry's over the next couple of years. You'll have some for years to come. And so while in a lot of ways I don't think it's a big deal or groundbreaking, the amount of attention it's gotten because of the overreaction, I do think it's important. Interesting story coming out of the Biden administration on Cuba, and that is the White House is forming a working group to review the ban of remittances to Cuba. Remittance payments are things where somebody who lives, if you're from Brazil, you live in the United States, you work in the United States, and you send money to your family in Brazil, that's a remittance payment. These are key to places like Yemen, where I think a lot of the income of regular people now is made up of remittance payments. I think the World Bank said 10% of the people in that country completely rely on it. I'm not sure how important remittance payments, especially since this is just remittance payments from the U.S., is to Cuba. However, there are a lot of money that is sent from the people in the United States, Cubans who now live here, back to their family in Cuba to try to help them to live a little bit better lives. I think you may buy a little bit more. Well, under the Obama administration, that this was allowed, and I think even under the Bush administration, it started in 2004 that these could be sent, and then that was cut off again during the Trump administration, claiming that the Cuban government was taking too much of the money. Now the Biden administration says they're forming a working group to figure out how to do remittance payments to Cuba in a way where a lot of the money doesn't go to the Cuban government. Now it seems like the decision should actually be on the Cuban Americans who want to send money back to their families, how much they're willing to let the Cuban government take. I'm sure most countries would collect taxes on money coming into their country, so I don't know if what the Cuban government is doing here is as nefarious as the Biden administration wants to claim, or that they really need a working group to do this, but hopefully they will allow remittances to start going to Cuba sometime in the near future. So the U.S. Made a deal with Germany this week, signed a deal with Germany on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. For anybody watching the video here, you can see a little map of how there's a small gulf or something between Finland and Estonia, where Russia reaches out to the Gulf of Finland and was at the Baltic Sea, and they've now run a pipeline from there to Germany, and this is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This is going to bring a lot of gas, or I think liquefied natural gas, into Central Europe, and it's really going to reduce the energy costs of some of these people. Germany has been very excited about this project. The U.S. has threatened to sanction it, including including at the start of the Biden administration. However, the Biden administration has backed up on that now, and they are saying that they're not going to sanction Germany for importing this Russian gas. Now, in the agreement between Germany and the United States, Germany did say that they would sanction Russia if Russia was meddling in the Ukrainian, liquefied natural gas market. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to be defined. I'm guessing Germany is going to have a different interpretation of that than the U.S. Ukraine is very unhappy with this situation. And by the way, the agreement between the U.S. and Germany also called for $1 billion of German investment in Ukrainian energy projects. So Ukraine is saying that's a real problem, that this Nord Stream 2 pipeline is going to be done because Ukraine makes a lot of money every year because they have a pipeline that runs between Russia and the rest of Europe, and they collect transaction fees as that gas moves across their country. And so seeing a loss of income, they're very unhappy with this. Well, I think the United States should tell Ukraine to go pound sand on this one. Too bad if you had maybe not had such a corrupt government, and all these government officials who have been lining their pockets all these years had invested more money in maintaining the energy infrastructure of Ukraine, then more liquefied natural gas would be flowing through Ukraine, and they wouldn't have built this very expensive pipeline at the bottom of the sea to Germany. But that's what has happened. Tough luck for the Ukrainians is what the Biden administration should say. Ukrainian officials are making it known that they're unhappy with this. They're asking for mediation between themselves and Germany at the European Union, and they're also looking for more security guarantees from the U.S. and Germany, including, of course, that entry into NATO they've been seeking for so long. And so this part of it is disturbing because I know in the past when I've seen situations, the U.S. makes this nuclear deal with Iran in 2015. It's a positive thing that Obama did. Oh wait, but now we have to start a war in Yemen supporting Saudi Arabia because the Saudis are getting a little bit nervous about their place in the U.S. axis. And so if the U.S. looks at this and Ukraine says, "Oh no, we're worried about us being less important because the oil or the gas is going straight into Germany," the U.S. could do things militarily with Ukraine to show more support. I don't think they would go as far as letting Ukraine join NATO. Let's hope at least, but other military support or something like that. Another interesting story in this region is Russia says that, or the U.S. U.S. Navy Admiral Robert P. Burke, the commander of U.S. naval forces in Europe and Africa, has said that Russia is increasing their aggression in the Black Sea. This was extremely confusing to me because anybody who watches the show knows that the U.S. just got done conducting massive 32-nation war games in the Black Sea, including countries like Ukraine and Georgia that are not members of NATO, but the U.S. has said that they're on the path to NATO membership, and Russia has called it a red line, allowing these countries to join NATO. So this could be a real issue as the U.S. conducts more and more war games in this region. And it wasn't even that the U.S. just conducted this one massive war game in the Black Sea recently. As soon as the Sea Breeze 21 war games concluded, the U.S. started a new round of war games, this time I think hosted by Bulgaria, and was only 14 nations, called Breeze 2021. You see how that's a little tricky bit of propaganda right there, make the two sound alike so people just think that this is like an extension or something else. No, it's a completely different set of war games. We also had last month the UK, which is a US NATO ally, HMS Defender sailed within 12 miles of the coast of Crimea, provoking an incident with Russia. And so I think if anybody's been more aggressive in the region, you would have to look at the US and our NATO allies. Speaking of war games, this one by Rick Roseroff at antiwar.com. U.S. airborne troops armored vehicles arrive for multinational NATO exercises in Georgia. The games are going to take place from July 26th to August 6th. Honestly, whoever came up with the name of this one isn't doing that great of a job. It's called Agile Spirit. I don't know, all the other ones like Eagle Falcon and stuff like that sounds so much cooler, but they went with Agile Spirit on this set of war games. The exercise is run by the U.S. and Georgia, and it includes Britain, Canada, Estonia, Germany, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Spain, Turkey, and Azerbaijan and Ukraine. So that's a long list of countries and big war games. And of course, remember, Georgia is on the southern border of Russia. I'm sure Russia views this as more kind of U.S. hostile aggression. Two quick updates on Afghanistan that I think are important. This one is a statement from Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley saying that 200 of the, I think, 419 Afghan district centers are now under control of the Taliban, and that's up from 81 district centers in the last month. So that's a big change. Now, I'm not sure if this is maybe debunking the idea that the Taliban have been avoiding taking district centers, or that the Taliban took all these district centers, and that's when they said, well, we're taking way too many district centers, and have since slowed the number that they're taking. This is 200 of 419 is almost half, and it is just surprising how fast the wheels are coming off of this thing. And now the U.S. has a real problem, right? Because we have all these people who have worked for the U.S. mission in Afghanistan for the past 20 years who now feel unsafe in the country and who want to leave. And the U.S. law and promise, one of the promises of working with the U.S. is that if you feel unsafe in the mission fails, then we'll get you a third country to go to. Well, the U.S. has, I think, 2,500 coming to Fort Lee in Virginia, but there's a lot more expected to apply, and they were looking for Central Asian countries, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan to house some 9,000 Afghans who the U.S. says are at risk being targeted by the Taliban. And Uzbekistan was the first country to respond, and they say that there was no legal basis for accepting the U.S. request to temporarily house thousands of Afghans. And that seems to me like they're giving the U.S. a big no on that one. And so this is an important story I'm going to continue to cover on the show and update regularly, because as the Afghan government continues to lose territory, there's going to be more and more Afghans at risk of these reprisal attacks. In Syria, a U.S. airstrike killed 3 people. I don't think this strike was targeting Shia militias, and there are reports that Kurdish fighters had surrounded the target before it was called in, and so it's possible that this was an Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, some kind of Sunni jihadist that was targeted here. We have reports that for the first time, Biden bombed Somalia. They say they carried out an airstrike against al-Shabaab militants. No idea who was killed here or when I guess when we'll actually have any results of actual reporting on the ground, other than just the AFRICOM statements. We know from the Trump administration, who routinely bombed Somalia, that a lot of times the bombing went completely unreported. And so I find it interesting that they're saying that this is the first airstrike under Biden. I would say it's the first admitted airstrike under Biden, but who knows if the CIA has carried out one there in the past. And it wouldn't surprise me if that happened and went completely unreported. And even if civilians were killed here, I doubt that it would be reported. Continuing with some news in Africa, we're now moving on to Ethiopia, where the civil war in that country seems to be expanding a little bit. November of 2020, there was a situation where I don't want to go into exactly how the whole war broke out. Me and Will interviewed Danny Sherjan on this, but war broke out in Ethiopia. The government went in and basically kicked out the government of the country's Tigray region and allied with different ethnic militias in Ethiopia, as well as the Eritrean, the neighboring country, their military to fight against this insurgency in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian government declared victory, and then suddenly, about a month or a month and a half ago, we're getting all these reports that the Tigray forces are fighting back and pushing the Ethiopian and other militaries out of the Tigray region of Ethiopia. Well, now they're reporting that these Tigrayan forces have crossed out of just the Tigray region and are attacking the neighboring Afar region. And I believe some of the people from this region were part of the ethnic militias attacking the Tigray region. And one of the reasons this is so important is the UN says there's famine or near famine conditions in a large part of the Tigray region. We're now seeing over 50,000 people displaced from their home in the Afar region. And so this is an area of the world where food distribution is on the brink. And as this war continues to grind on and apparently grow, that situation could get a lot worse. Last up here, I want to just mention this from Nigeria, where anybody who reads the news wires knows that once or twice a week in the past couple of months, there's been a report of armed gunmen going into a village and either committing a massacre or committing mass kidnappings, oftentimes targeting students, kidnapping scores or hundreds of people at a time. Oftentimes these people are ransomed back to the government. Just this week I think the government got 100 ransomed students back. And so it's not that all these people are being killed or maybe turned into child soldiers, sex slaves, or something like that. Some of them are ending up being free, but there is a good amount of violence happening in Nigeria, and we have Nigeria's government regulator telling the TV stations of the country to curb reporting on violence. And so I wanted to mention this because it could change the amount of reporting we're seeing out of Nigeria. I'm sure that this is the biggest African country by population, and so there is probably a larger Western international media presence in Nigeria as compared to some other African countries. But if less reporting comes out of Nigeria, that could be the cause of the reason, even if just local sources aren't reporting it, so then it's not getting picked up by the international media. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping the show for this week. Hope everybody's enjoying the show. Share it. It's new out on Rumble. Subscribe to the show there if you have an account. Promote it to people. If you want me and Will to continue to promote our content on different platforms that you like, be sure to share the show and stuff. If nobody's watching the show on a certain platform, maybe it's more for boomer cons than people with anti-war taints, then we don't have to use it. But if anybody is willing to share and recommend the show to a certain platform, we're certainly willing to have it up there. So going up on Rumble, we should have iHeartRadio up soon. I'm hoping to hear back from them. I'm looking at Rokefin, I think it's called. Maybe more of a left-wing voice typically, but hopefully getting the show up there shortly. So, everybody just continue to share, get the show out there. Hosted at the Libertarian Institute. Paloma Verde is the sponsor, palomaverde.com. Promo code PEACE. Social media accounts at Facebook, MeWe, and Twitter. Video version at YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble. And donate Patreon, Subscribe Star, Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash. All the links are in the show notes page. Thanks, everyone.